everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Dealer exclusive March block reveal for our mystery quilt with Kimberbell. I'm Amy, and I am so excited for you to be here. You will remember last month we finished the month with the hint of this look for our March block. Are you ready? Have you guessed? Do you have any clue? Because here it is. Here is the March block that we're going to be making this month for our mystery quilt. We're going to make two of them. Just a note that there is a embellishment in here that we will not need until the quilt is finished. So over here on the left, that mint green petals that you see, those dimensional petals, those are actually attached to the quilt after we are finished. So you'll find them in your embellishment kit. You may have already included them in your March packet. We will not need them today to make our block. We are going to need a hoop different than what is listed here in this image. If you are not quilting in the hoop, you can use a 5x7 embroidery field for this project. If you are quilting in the hoop, we are going to need a hoop bigger than 5x7 because the actual block itself is 6x8. We're going to be using a 6x8 quilting design. Okay, so we need a hoop field that will fit that. In the world of Bernina, that is a maxi hoop. If you don't have a maxi hoop or a hoop that size, we have a few options that we can do for this project, and I'll talk about that when we get there. Stabilizer is going to be our light mesh cutaway, or if you're not quilting in the hoop, you're going to need a medium cutaway. We're going to need to apply fusible backing or fusible woven to the back of all of our pieces. So the background and both flower pieces are going to need a piece of fusible woven attached to them. Here's our thread colors. And our background quilting color is cream or whatever color you're choosing to do for this particular project. We have some special alignment that needs to be done for this block. We have to do some moving, which we have done in a previous month, but just kind of as a review. If you are quilting in the hoop, we're going to bring up the 6x8 Spring 7 quilting design, and then we're going to place that in the hoop, and then we're going to add our embroidery design to it. So let's take a look. I've already opened up my 6x8 file, quilting file. You can see that I have placed it into this midi hoop. Now, if you don't own a midi hoop, maybe in the world of Bernina, you may own a mega. Okay. If you take a look, you could use the mega. If you take a look, what falls outside of the embroidery field in the mega hoop is your tack down and placement lines just for the sides, which is okay if we can't embroider those. And with the Bernina, we are able to embroider if something falls outside of the embroidery hoop. The machine just kind of erases those stitches. So it's not going to be harmful if we tell the machine to go ahead and embroider with this red ring around our hoop. It just is giving you a warning to let you know, hey, are you aware that something is outside of the hoop? If you are, you just say green check mark. Go ahead, I'm aware. I know what I'm doing. You can also use a medium clamp hoop. Now on the medium clamp, it doesn't show that the stitching is outside of the hoop, so there's no red ring here. So it may fit in the hoop without a problem. But even if this is outside of the hoop, when it all comes to stitching, again, it's just the placement and tack down of the background fabric, just for the top and bottom. We have our placement and tack downs for the sides, so we would be okay. So I'm going to go back to my maxi hoop. If you have a midi hoop, even in the midi hoop, it's gonna be really, really close because a portion of this bee in the upper corner and a portion of this flower is outside of the hoop. So if you do not have the ability to use a medium clamp, a mega or a maxi hoop, or own those particular hoops, I would take a piece of fabric that is the size that we have cut here, and I would use the clear blue tile portion of the design to quilt this. And you could quilt this in 2 4x6 tiles, okay, or 4 smaller ones, and then you would be just fine. And then hoop that, put that in the hoop, and then add the embroidery design on top of it. Okay. We are going to add our design. So let me again go back to my maxi. I'm going to add a design. I'm going to navigate out to my March folder. I'm going to open up my embroidery files, EXP format, and here is my design. So you can see he gets centered in there. Our design states, or our instructions state, align the bottom block embroidery file with the bottom of the quilting design. So if I zoom in here, this is the bottom of my block design, okay, or my embroidery file, and I am going to move this straight down. So I'm going to turn my stitch length knob counterclockwise until the bottom of the embroidery design lines up with the bottom of the quilting design. Okay, so that's just generating an overlap just to make sure that when we go and sew our blocks together, this is going to look like it's growing out of the seam. It's not going to be floating above the seam as to where we have pieced our block. We've just moved it down that 1/4 of an inch so that when we trim and then piece, it will piece at this inner line and just make it look like it's growing out of the sashing. Now, once that is aligned, we are ready to get started. So for those that are not using quilting in the hoop, we have to do some alignment of our fabric, because remember, we need this not to be centered in the background of our base fabric. It's got to be lower. So the design has built into it our placement for us. So you're going to hoop that medium cutaway stabilizer, and then we are going to follow the steps in the instructions that is going to stitch out a little tick mark. You are going to then fold your fabric in half, right sides together, and 1 inch up from the bottom. So you're going to have 2 folds. You'll have the horizontal and the vertical fold. Once you have those folds in there, we will line those up with that tick mark. So fold your horizontal line is going to line up with the small horizontal in the hoop, and your vertical fold is going to line up with the vertical line in the hoop. Once you get those aligned, you're going to carefully unfold all of this, smooth it out, and then run the second color stop of the design, which will be the basting box to hold this in the hoop. Okay. Now, for those of us that are quilting in the hoop, when we are finished quilting this design, before we immediately start stitching the embroidery design, we're going to have to skip a couple of color stops. And I will point that out when we get to it. All right, so depending upon the method that you're doing, I'm going to talk about quilting in the hoop. And just as a reminder, we're going to stitch color stop 1, which is going to stitch a rectangle in the hoop for us to tell us where to put our batting. We're going to put our batting completely covering the placement line, and then we're going to run the color stop that will stitch our batting down. Once our batting is stitched in place, we'll use a pair of scissors and trim close to the batting line. Now, the next color stop after the batting is trimmed is to stitch a box a little bit bigger than that one to tell us where to put our fabric. This is a color stop I typically skip. Okay, so I am pretty sure I know where my big giant piece of background fabric is going, and just to save time, I don't typically run the placement line for background fabric. I skip color stop 3. I then place my background fabric right side up, covering all of my batting, okay, making sure that I extend at least a 1/4 inch beyond all edges of the batting. And then I'll stitch color stop 4, which is a fabric basting stitch. We are not going to cut any background fabric, and then we're going to change to our thread color and quilt. Now, I personally am doing all of these color stops in my cream thread so that I don't need to change when it gets time to quilt the design. Now, next month, I had someone point out or mention or comment in last month's video about another way to do the batting, and my plan was to talk about this next month, and I will. But next month I'm going to show you how to eliminate the batting tack down and trimming close to the batting tack down edge. So we'll talk about eliminating those 2 orange X's next month. I just wanted to make sure that we are kind of in a good habit for the basic technique of block by block quilting. Now, once you have your quilting finished, so here is nice and quick. I have got my batting is in place and trimmed. My background fabric is tacked down and ready to go, and I'm going to run the color stop, which is going to quilt my background design. Now, when your quilting is finished, if you've combined your designs, we need to advance 2 color stops to get past the built-in placement for the design if you weren't quilting in the hoop. So once you're finished quilting, the next color stop would technically stitch that tick mark. We don't need that. So I'm going to skip ahead 1 color stop. Then it would be wanting to stitch the basting box, which we don't need either. So I'm going to skip that one. So if you have combined your designs and you're paying attention to your color bar on your machine, you're actually going to go to color stop 8. And color stop 8 should kind of jump up here for some stitch lines that we're going to do to know where to put our particular piece of fabric next. Now, we're going to be appliquing or doing the placement lines and the tack downs and things for this set of flowers. Kimberbell doesn't necessarily really state that we need to change thread color. We have cream in. We can do this in cream because the cover stitching for this design, this portion of the design, is going to be a satin stitch. You won't see it. So if you would like, you could go ahead and just run the next color stops in the cream colored thread. Or we can change it out to the matching thread color, okay? Completely up to you. So I am going to leave this in cream, okay? And we're going to run the placement line. We're then going to place our yellow or goldish colored fabric that we have placed a piece of fusible backing on over top. We're going to tack it in place, and then we're going to trim this up to those tack downs. There it is. I'm now going to work through and trim. We have some tight areas, tight squeezes in here. You're going to want to experiment with scissors and figure out which ones work the best for you. Don't be overly concerned because it does place a fairly wide satin stitch at those points and intersections. So, we don't want to clip any of the stitching, but again, a majority of that is going to be caught underneath the satin stitching. Once your fabric is trimmed, we're going to change out to the yellow thread. We're going to run the yellow cover stitch around that flower 1. We're going to then change back to the cream colored thread to stitch the flower 1 detail, and then we will switch to the green to stitch the dark stems, leaves, and detail that's there. Now, once your yellow flowers are finished, the decorative detail on the flower and the dark green stem, we're going to move to the next step, which is going to repeat the process, doing the same with appliquing your pink flowers to your project. Now, the cover stitch for the pink flowers is not a satin stitch. It's a decorative stitch. So I highly recommend that you change your thread to the pink to do all the steps related to tacking down and trimming these flowers to the pink thread. So we're going to work through the steps of placement line, place your fabric, tack your fabric in place, trim it as close to the tack down as you can, and then we will run the cover stitch. Okay, so we'll run the cover stitch in pink, and then we will start working through the remainder of the embellishments or the remainder of the design. Okay, so just like we did with the yellow fabric, we're also going to trim here, and we have some tight squeezes down in between the petals. This is, like I said, a decorative stitch, and that decorative stitch gets pretty wide at this point. So like you can even see, let's see here, that decorative stitch actually comes up to this point because it kind of overlaps in both places. So don't stress too much if like getting all the way down into the tip is a little challenging. It will be okay. So I'm going to trim this, return the hoop to the machine, and then we're going to run the cover stitch. Now, once our pink is finished appliquing our flower and stitch that one little bud right there, we're going to now work through the 3 color stops that remain here for our design. We are going to switch to the light green that is going to stitch the other stems and leaves. We have the purple, which is going to stitch the little purple flowers. And then we are going to go back to the dark green to do those last few ferny stems and leaf detail for our project. When your design is finished, if you did quilting in the hoop, you can go ahead and take your project out of the hoop. If you are not quilting in the hoop, you want to remove that basting stitch that the machine put in place to hold your fabric in place. Okay, and then that way you'll be able to, you don't need it, we want to get rid of it. And then we are going to trim this block up to 6.5 by 8.5. You want to make sure that it's centered horizontally and that the bottom of the seam or the bottom of the stems are aligned with the inner bottom edge of a 6.5 by 8.5 ruler. So let's come on over here. I have my block out of the hoop. I have my 6.5 by 8.5 orange pop ruler. I am going to align him, pretty much lining him up with the lines of that basting line that was stitched in the background quilting. And then I like to take the next size up and put around. Just gives me more to hold onto. And then I'm using that So Tight magnetic mat, so I'm gonna stick my magnets on here. Doesn't need to be a magnetic mat, but I highly recommend when using orange pop rulers that you use a rotating mat. If you don't have a rotating mat, I would stand to the corner of a table so that you can work and you're not doing this. Okay. Thought I didn't catch that corner right there, so let's fix that. And there is our block. You are going to make 2 of these, okay, identical blocks. These are your little felt embellishment petals. Leave them in the bag, put them back in your kit, or package them up with these blocks right here and leave them together. We will apply these to our block when the quilt is finished. Okay, and that is March. Are we ready to get a little hint for April? All right, here is our April hint. We have lace, we have white, black, we have birds. Is that Lily of the Valley that's there? So, goodness gracious, I have not a clue. Well, good luck, and I will see you back here at the beginning of April for the reveal of our April block. I hope everyone has a wonderful month, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great day, everyone.